Today, I want to just discuss with you like a feeling that I feel recently, which is in full-time job, usually I don't feel very tired after a full day of work. Whereas back in my PhD days, I always feel like, oh, at the end of the day, like time is long. The workout might be longer because we stay in the lab all the time, but I don't feel tired. But now that in the real work environments, especially in the past couple of weeks, because we have all these internal deadlines and even though it's only probably an 8 hour, probably 9 hour workday, at the end I felt exhausted. I feel like a zombie afterwards, like a soulless. Just want to lay in the couch in the evening. I want to get your. Do you feel that now that you
I
are like almost a year at a full time
that's
job?
I think that's such an interesting topic and question because we're coming from different points, right? I sort of recently joined and left the PhD life, and very closely remember how exhausting those long days were, and so this feels like paradise. But then I see my managers and people who have been in industry a little bit longer, and they're fatigued and they're tired, and so at some point you sort of transition over. I'm not sure when that is, but the PhD life is just exhausting because there's always more to do and you're always trying to impress your like the boss, like your advisor. And so you feel like it's never good enough. You're like tackling imposter syndrome. You're trying to get the next result so it's more impressive. And you're also like don't really know what you're doing half the time. Like it's research, so you're like you're bouncing against these walls where you try something and it doesn't work, and then you have to understand why it doesn't work, or you have to try something new. Uh, versus in I guess industry, things are a little bit more regulated. You know what you're testing. You have like a lot more support. But I'm curious as to when this fatigue started setting in for you, and like what is it because of the deadline crunch? Do you find yourself working more these days than you were a couple of weeks ago, like just like hours on the clock? Or is it just that the work is much harder because it's like there's suddenly the stress of the deadline, and that if you get this wrong, you might have to push for the next cycle?
Yeah, I think they are as you're talking about your experience in PhD. I think um we're conflating two things. One is the physical fatigue, like just tired, like physically like unable to move. And the other one is anxious, like you're not gonna meet the next deadline. You don't know when you can graduate. You don't know when your advisor is gonna say, oh, now we're ready to submit the paper. Otherwise, just keep working on it. Like there's no end in sight. So it's one is more like on the mental, one is on the physical side. And then right now I'm feeling more, and I share the mental stress at doing PhD as well.
Yeah.
But more recently, my fatigue is more on the physical side. I just feel like, oh, it's a long work day. And compared with a couple of weeks ago, what have changed? Maybe my interns have arrived for the summer, so I got to spend a significant amount of work time to them to
Yeah.
mentor them, to get them on board, to know all the internal tools and internal projects, code names, to help them understand what my priority is, and hopefully convince them the project that they are working on is important and helpful. And also, meanwhile, we also have internal like deadline that we set for ourselves, which coincide with the interns arriving. I think the additional workloads, but the work time is fixed, right? Like I do not want to just extend my work hours into the evenings and the weekends. So we had a fixed amount of time. So the work intensity, like the focus, is much more.
It has to go up. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe before this couple of weeks, I would take a break between meetings and like focus work. I would maybe just chill for a couple of minutes. But now it's like meeting, and meetings. Like for example, yesterday in the office, I remember it's from 9 a.m. to 3 to 4 p.m. It's like meeting back to back meetings, maybe with 5 minutes like bathroom break. And even lunch hour is a meeting. So that was quite intense. And you brought up this idea of you're now just joining a new company and you feel like, oh, it's much more relaxed than PhD, and you see your managers and like your more senior people are experiencing that. I'm not sure if I'm transitioning to that like senior stage now, just more responsibility and everything. Yeah.
Well, I think I found some of the clues in there in what you said. So there's a couple of interesting points you raised, and that's that somehow magically when you get to industry, you set these boundaries and you say, okay, I'm done. I'm only going to work the 5 days of the work week, right? And then when it hits a certain hour, I'm going to go home. And then, so when there's more work to do, it doesn't bleed over into the weekend or into the nights. It just means your intensity increases during the day. And that was 100% absolutely not true during the PhD. It was just like, okay, Saturday's a working day, Sunday's a working day, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., you're still sending messages out and your advisor responds at like 1 or 2 a.m. for whatever reason one day. And so then you feel like you need to be up. And so there's this sort of physical exhaustion of always being on forever for years. And like it continues forever and ever. You don't know when you can take a vacation because you should always be working and not everyone else is taking a vacation. And so all that somehow goes away in industry. Now everyone else is taking vacations, is having their weekends, they're not responding, or they want to respect that other people might not do it, so they feel weird about requesting something. And so then everyone sort of aligns and falls into only working during the week. So that really helps with I guess the fatigue and the recovery. You end up like not working the weekends, you can actually escape a little bit, which means you are a little bit more focused during the week. But then when work picks up, you really have to work during those hours. And sometimes you forget how to do that once you've been like relaxed for so long. And then the other point you made is about meetings. I think one of the most exhausting parts of being in engineering or doing research or even in industry is like the communicating with people and dealing with like people and like relationships of products and teams and getting resources and stuff like that, or just like mingling around the office. And not because of any sense of being antisocial. I mean, you know me, I'm very much like a more social engineer. But it's just that you're used to like working on your own and like getting into the zone and doing all these things, and then people come up and ask you questions and it's distracting, or it's just like you're juggling a lot of people you don't know and a lot of different faces. So if you're meeting all these interns, you have to like put on this great smile and say, I really like working here. I hope you will too. I want you to work on my project, not someone else's, and I want you to get excited by it. And once you know people, that's really easy to do, and it just flows. But when you're meeting people for the first time, there's a lot of like extra attention to like how people are reacting and how you're coming off, because you want to have your like best foot forward. And that is happening all the time in industry. Like you're constantly meeting new people from new teams or interacting with more and more people because the company is so big. Like in my office alone, there's like 15,000, 16,000 people. Obviously, I don't work with all of them, but it's just, there's a flow and a constant like buzz of different faces passing by. And then when you're in your PhD, your first year, you're like nervous and you're getting to know your advisor and your lab mates. By your second year or third year, you already know everyone knows you, and you sort of just relax and you're not worried about how you come off or anything like that because everyone knows you. And so you're much more just like being yourself and talking to them and knowing that they understand you. Whereas here, there's the having to be on all the time when dealing with social interactions, and then switching focus to like very intensely looking at code and using that part of your brain for like hours by yourself. The back and forth is physically, mentally exhausting. So I imagine that sort of contributes to your past week a little bit.
Yeah, and I want to add a couple of things. Disclaimers. The first, working like nights and weekends doing a PhD is not a norm. I think we are kind of the outliers. An advisor answering Slack and email like at 2 a.m. is also not a norm. Do not expect your advisor to do that for whoever that's listening to this.
I
I
think
know
you need
many.
to set those boundaries.
Yeah,
is
I
what
think.
I'll say.
Yeah, I think I know a lot of PhD students who have a good work-life balance. They handle it really well from the very beginning. I only started to handle it like probably midway through my PhD, and yeah, because I wanted to just set the boundary, as you said. And the other thing you mentioned that you glimpsed through it, but then I think it's one part that's exhausting is put on a smile and then talk with the intern with all this. It's not that I don't want to smile. I'm happy to see all my colleagues, interns or not, or full-time and product partners, everyone. It's just that we have to just pretend that nothing else happens. Like all the previous meetings just gone. All the problems in life just gone. Now we're focusing on this particular conversation. That focus is helpful. Like that helped me get focused on this current conversation, but those other things are just still happening. I just learned the
Yeah.
bad news in my previous meeting, and I just this morning, oh, like there's something wrong with my pets, and I need to take care of that. And but those are mentally draining. And then when I have to put myself out, that just put on additional, like maybe the fatigueness just added on. Yeah.
It's interesting because with the added time that you get by having your evenings and having your weekends, you have access to all these fun things that you want to do, which is great. That's why we're here, to enjoy those moments. But also it adds a little bit more stress, right? Like now you have all these extra responsibilities happening and things that are outside of work that you're juggling. And for many years during the PhD, I was like sort of only focused on the PhD. I didn't have extra
Yep.
things going on. I didn't have pets. I wasn't hanging out with like people other than like through work and through like stuff like that. So you get these extra responsibilities and they start to also take a toll, but it's a good toll. It's what you want. But like you said, like while you're in the day, you're juggling the fact that today, for whatever reason, I need to leave by like 5:30 or 6 because I have a dinner with this person who's in town who I haven't seen forever. But also my deadline is coming up and I'm a little bit behind. And so how do you juggle both? These are like the good decisions you have to make, but it does cause stress. And you're also juggling everyone else's like schedules also. Like I need to meet with this person, that person, but they can only meet this hour. So, okay, I'm shuffling things around. Whereas the PhD life, everyone is in this like blob together where everyone knows they're always accessible. As long as you set your boundaries, you don't worry about it at night, but otherwise people are messaging you left and right. And you don't have to juggle as much because everyone knows what situation you're in. They know you're going to be there a while, and there's like less of this like demand for people's time and attention. Whereas now, like if I'm working with someone else on a project, I don't know what other 10 things they're juggling. So it's like hard to sort of align with what it is that we need to do together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to add another personal story to this because as you mentioned, just many other things that's happening behind the scene that people don't know. I think in around 2019 or 20, I forget the exact timing, when I bought my house in Seattle, the house was closing and I need to put all the funds and get the money from the lenders, but then it wasn't going through because some visa issue because I was on a student visa at the time. And then I was getting this phone call like it's not going through, and oh crap! And then I lose all my deposit and earnest money and all those things. It's a lot of money for me at the time. And then, but on the same day, I need to talk with a product tech transfer team to show my latest progress on the physics demo and so on. Like back in there, I was still working on a lot of physics project, like building physics engine to some of our products. And then I had to put a space, and then but it was my heart is dead inside. Because how do I solve this? Like I can't deal with this visa situation on my own and so on. But then I still have to do that. That was one of the hardest moments for maybe doing that year on that hardest moment. But then after that, I think it helped me grow, and I need to learn to compartmentalize even better. Like this just belong to life, this belong to work. I should not try to mix them together. And that's one of those moments that happened to me.
It's tricky because you want to be yourself as best you can at work, and so you want to just like share with people because you're excited about things, but then also you want to treat it as like work. So you have to be professional and leave some of that like at the door when you walk in. But that's like it's so like you're not telling other people about it, but you're still carrying it around. So that's really tricky. It's also tricky because we've gone back and forth in this like hybrid like work style where a lot of people work from home, a lot of people work from the office, or people are coming in and out. Or we did a couple of years in the pandemic and we were used to having more time to do these random errands. And now as people are sort of like slowly returning to office, or for whatever reason you come in, you're trading off that time. You can't run these errands while you're waiting for your code to do something. You can't just go and quickly do that. Now all that piles up in the afternoon. And you have to always be on while carrying these things with you while you're in the office. And that's really hard because you don't really know what else is happening in people's lives. So you have to always respect that. And like I said, as you meet more and more people in a company versus a PhD life where it's your advisor and you, that's the main connection. Everything else is kind of extra. And so like you really only focus on that relationship. Now you're focused on like 10 different relationships with 10 different teams and products and whatever, and you're thinking about the future and also like, and so it's much trickier to juggle.
Yeah, you mentioned in PhD, like maybe once after the first year or two, your collaborators become more or less fixed sets. Then you
Yeah.
don't feel like you have to keep social with other people. But then when you join the company, do you feel like you are still on ramp of knowing all the engineers or like people that you need to know to work effectively?
I think that's tricky. It depends how big your team is. Like my immediate team, I know everyone pretty well, and they know me now, having worked with them for a while. But I'm starting to realize how small we are in like the larger scope. There's like so many other teams that touch code that interfaces with ours. And in the beginning, I thought we were just like doing our own thing, which is really nice and controlled. But now I'm realizing there's a ton of other people that are messing with what we do or expecting things from us. And so I'm starting to learn their names, first of all, and then I'm starting to learn what they do. And a lot of it is hard because you don't want to ask like dumb questions. So you don't want to be like, oh, I see that you guys take these things from our product and we take these from yours, but like, why? Or like, what do you do with it when you get it? And so you have to think of like how to communicate with them, how to tell them that you're still trying to understand, and then also you don't know what level they are, if they've been here 20 years, if they've just got here. Like, so who do you even ask as like a point of contact for when you have questions like that? And there's like friendly people who in your PhD you go to and you know that they can point you in the right direction. Here, I only know my immediate team. So I'm still getting to know who are these other people who I can ask these sorts of like noob questions to.
Yeah, you said that there's this other team who use some of your code and you're using some of their code, and you are afraid to ask why they took the code and how they're using it. Why do you feel like you don't want to ask them?
I just don't want to. I want to figure out what they're doing with, or like have like better questions to ask them, other than just like wasting their time. Like, what are you doing here? Like
The
sorts of
reason why
questions.
I ask you this question is because I do that all the time. Whenever I see somebody taking my codes, like, and
You're like curious.
I immediately follow up with them, hey, thank you for using my codes. What are you doing with it? How can I help?
Yeah,
And yeah, like if you're sharing more broadly, please let me know because maybe my code is not set up to scale very well. I want to be able to add disclaimers and also just yeah,
set the
because I do that all
expectations
the
right
time.
and
Yeah,
and evolve it. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. For us, it's like these teams like are aware of each other, but as I'm new, I'm not aware of all the teams that are interacting with each other. So it's mainly about like saving face and understanding. Okay, these people obviously are using us and they've been using us since the beginning, but like why? And then trying to understand that before I
I
go
see.
in and tell them that their code is bad. You know what I mean?
I see. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe maybe I also went through this saving phase periods where
yeah,
I feel like I should wait a bit until I figure something out to ask insightful questions. Now, maybe because I learned that I'm not smart enough to figure it out by myself, or that my time and my team's time is also valuable. I tend to
yeah.
reach out people sooner than what I what I'm used to. Yeah.
This is something you learn, I think, and it's hard, and I'm still figuring it out myself. Like, there's an imposter syndrome in the PhD, and or at certain points, because you're still figuring out how to do research. And then once you get a PhD, there's like an imposter syndrome of why do I have a PhD and not the guy next to me? But then also like making sure that people like that feel respected are smart, and that you also feel respected and are smart. And so like asking the right questions, you always want to be like, you want to pause and ask the more insightful one, right? Uh, Rather than coming off as like, oh, you didn't really pay attention, something like that. But that's hard to do when you're new to a place. And so I think the right idea is what you're saying is to ask the questions early, because there's always someone smarter than you, like in the room. This is always true in the PhD, and it's true in life and everywhere you go, right? Especially at the company. And so I think the way to really be effective is to play to everyone's strengths, and rather than being the guy who has to solve everything yourself, right? Like you need to sort of just disseminate the problem quicker, ask for the right person, and they will help you solve it, or they will solve it, right? So like use everyone else's strengths. At some point, you're going to be that person, right? Someone's going to be clueless, and if they reach out for help, oh, that's something that's easy. I can do that for you, no problem. Um, but instead of having to do it all yourself, which comes from, I think, that imposter syndrome of like, no, I need to prove myself. I need to really show that I know what I'm doing. It's smarter and better to just like reach out, ask the person who actually knows or who built the code from scratch, and they can just tell you in 2 seconds rather than you like banging your head against the wall trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. And also there is a dedicated balance, right? Like you don't want to use the expert as a Google.
Exactly.
And that's the other side of extreme. I don't think any of us is doing that, but it's something to take note of. What I told my intern when they first joined is that they should time box it. For example, if they run into API, like the internal product API that they don't know how to use, they should first search on the forum, whatever internal, external forums, and Stack Overflows and that kind of thing. And if it doesn't work out in maybe like an hour, then they should pack up their findings. That's the important bit. Pack up their findings, or look at this 10 posts, and none of them give me the exact answers, and then send that finding to whoever expert within the company. Hey, here's what I found out. I'm on the right track, and I'm misinterpreting this post. And then at this point, the expert can give you some more clear guidance. Otherwise, you just throw them, hey, how can I use this API? That sounds not very
it bugs them and it bothers them, and they also feel like you're not like learning or being involved in the process. Mine is slightly different. It's 10 to 30 minutes is my box. And so I am more interested in like, I'll search internally our tools. If I don't get it, then I'll raise it to like a chat, like a smaller chat, and then go larger and larger with the chat. Because if someone can figure it out immediately, that's great. And then I'll start bothering more and more people, just to not spam everyone's like chat messages. And then I don't necessarily go in with the packed up findings, but I pack up afterwards. And so I have this running document of like, every time I've ever gotten stuck while working here, here's where the solution was in the end. And so next time I get anywhere near a problem like this, I have this kind of like quick help tab, my own personal Stack Overflow that says, these are the commands that I use, or this is the person that you should talk to. And then this sort of like running log of like bugs and issues that I've had, I've made it public, and I've seen other people make theirs public also. And so now you have like this big resource of like, you know what worked for you, and then it's written in your own style and your own language so that you can really interpret it. And then you also talk to people who are like friendly and have theirs open, and then you can see, okay, they also ran into this problem. So then we all feel like we're running into problems together, which is like a good way to commiserate and feel better about the fact that we're running into problems. But also we can learn from like, oh, this is the command that helped them, and so I should probably try that first before I go bug everyone.
Yeah, it's nice that you have this document. I don't think I have a document. I just use Slack. Like I create Slack groups. Yeah, search Slack, and then from myself, like, because whenever I run into a problem, I usually share it with whether with an intern directly or with the broader group, and then I just search from my handle and then about this topic, and usually I find something like I'll thank myself in the past.
Exactly. It's funny how you keep running into the, like, if you stop using a certain part of the code for a while, you go somewhere else, and then you come back several months later, you're like, I wrote all this, but what does it do? Like, I have no idea. You so quickly lose that when you're so focused on something else.
Another thing that you said, you have this personal document. Do you train any LLMs to like chatbots to retrieve those? Because one thing, I want to use more chatbots in my work, but I'm just not building up that habit just yet. But my intern, for example, they use it more frequently than Google because they feel like it's more customized, and they can give them the input and output, and they would just write the skeleton code for them immediately, whereas Google is not immediately. You still need to read through the Stack Overflow and so on. So I wonder if you kind of train your personal document through some LLMs, and then
So we have a lot of these tools internally at Google, where we have our own Google engine, we have our own LLM engines internally, and they also read through our own internal Stack Overflows and through our code base. So a lot of times you can just ask them and they will point you in the right direction. And so like, you use Google for like facts or to get lots of data. And then if you want like an opinion or a suggestion, I would use an LLM or a chatbot that would go, here are like a couple of different ways you could do this, or here's some skeleton code that you can start with. That stuff is pretty useful. But for this document that I'm talking about, I don't necessarily use, I don't feed it as training or as resources to these LLMs, because I mainly just want to understand, and it's myself, what it is that I got stuck on. And it's kind of like writing it down is how you learn it, at least for me. And so like by if I fix it and then I don't save it or log it anywhere, I'll likely forget about it. But by writing it down and creating this document, and then referring to it and reading it, is how I'm actually mastering the part, because then I see how it fits into like the larger scheme of other issues that I run into. So I find that really useful.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I wish we had some internal tools like that. I think somebody must be working on it, just that I don't know it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
going back, sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was gonna go back to the fatigue and
Yes,
see.
that's what I'm doing too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling this fatigue in the past couple of weeks, and for the past 5 years I'm with my company, I don't really feel that, because I feel like it's maybe it's because I'm getting more senior, maybe it's because of mixture of other responsibilities I'm taking on outside of work and so on. But I want to ask you that as you are onboarding to this new team of the small team that you are part of, what's the most challenging thing that you feel like that you are adapting or you're still adapting? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a large code base that I work in, and
Mm-hmm.
so it you either take a step back and try and learn all of it, and then all you get is really high level information. So every time you ask someone, they give you something super high level, and that's not super useful, because you're like, okay, I get it. There's this is your input and this is your output. That's what I was expecting, but I need to understand like how or why. Like, and for that, you really need to dive in closer to what the code is doing, to the assumptions, to the history. Like, oh, the reason we coded this up is because the year we coded it up, we had like a bad whatever server or something, and so we made it a small version that worked on the servers we had, and then for whatever reason, 4 years later, this is still the version that's there, and it works, and it's like, okay, yeah, but now we don't have bad servers, right? Can we do this? That's like a completely made up example, but it's just there's a lot of like history baked into the code, and you're almost like an archaeologist. You're like trying to figure out like why they did this at the time that they did, or whose decision it was. And you start by doing this just for your team, and as you learn like what your code does, you start to see the boundaries, and then you go, okay, now who's on the other side of that boundary? Can we expect more from them, or can they expect more from us if we change certain things? Because we're constantly trying to evolve, like, or make our products like slightly better, and that's really hard. Like, you just don't know if what you're asking for is too much. You don't know if you're being too ambitious, and they're like, why are you doing this? Why do you want to change everything? So a lot of it is the learning part, where you feel like, at least for me, I was very much an expert in a very specific subject area, like physics-based simulations and stuff like that, or just like I was very up to date on all the papers that were coming out, all the methods, and now I'm learning a completely new like sub area. This is computational photography, in my case, and so having to like relearn that from scratch is sort of exhausting, mainly because you can't follow up on all the intuitions that you had before. You're constantly questioning yourself a little bit. So that part is really tough. And then the other part is just the frustration of like learning internal tools. Like, you're used to using all these things when you're doing your PhD or you're working outside of a company, and then your company has its own version of it. And the version they have is definitely better in a lot of ways than what you were using before. But now you have to sort of relearn the commands, or you're not taking advantage of the tool, right? Because you're used to using this outside version, which is like much more rudimentary. And so it's learning just the infrastructure, which is hard, which is why I think in a lot of these companies, they don't expect much from new hires for the first few months, because you just have to sort of like learn what tools exist and how to use them. And that part is frustrating, because you used to be able to crank out things so quickly. And now you're sort of like, you see everything come to a crawl, and that's what hurts. Yeah.
Yeah. On the second point, if you make it feel better, I think at least at Google, I think the internal tools, from what I've heard from many people and also online blogs and so on, the internal tools at Google is better than the rest of the industry that's open source and everything. Basically, if Google makes something really good, the open source part of it, but then the internal version is still way better because of the
Yeah.
integration. It's Google is engineer first company. Whereas where I work right now, I won't name the name explicitly, but it's public information. Um, the internal tools, we spend a lot of time to learn it, and the result is not good. Like it's horrible to use,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a something that Googlers can feel proud of. At least you learn something, and then that will accelerate your work in the years to come if you stay at Google.
Yeah.
But for us, like when we learn the internal tool, it's usually worse than what's out there. For example, if we use vanilla AWS, we will get AWS, but for internal whatever reason, compliance, like reason,
Yeah.
we need to use an Adobe. Oh, sorry, I blubbed name. We use the internal version, and then it's just not as good because of we're not I don't think we are an engineer first company. We're more like a creativity, creative tools, digital experience company, and
Yeah.
we're just lacking a little bit in that regard. And I felt that strongly in the past couple of years. Whenever we have a chance to use external API directly, I will very much do that. But most of the time, we're not allowed to do that.
The internal tools are nice because they speed up things, but there's also so many of them that it becomes like learning a new language like every other week. And then there's like multiple teams that will come up with tools for the same thing. And they'll have like slightly different variations, even if it's just like a script. And then you're sort of, everyone just, whatever they learn first, that's what they use forever. And so your manager has like a slightly different preference for how he sets things up than you do. And there's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way. So that's the good part, the flexibility. And then the bad part is that it's confusing and then you don't know who to ask for help. And like, that's just growing pains. Like you go to any new place and you start to work there, you have to like figure out the ins and outs of how they do it. But it is frustrating having gone from like a very stable situation for so many years to go to one where now you feel like you have to learn everything from scratch. But that's also like the whole reason why we did it. We graduated so we could move on and do the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't feel no remorse about that, but it is part of the frustration is I know the idea, I know the math, I know exactly what I need to do to get this to work, but that's like only like 30% of it. The other part is like, who do you talk to and what teams? And then also what tools are you using and how do you integrate with everyone else's existing system? And that's something that 5 years out, you no longer have these pains. You know exactly how everything works. And now you're just stuck in meetings. And
Yeah.
so you're talking to people rather than working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And is this the fatigue top question that you want to brought up? Because I remember I interrupted you. Yeah.
No, I think I was gonna. We can also say this for another time, but discussing the sort of balance between how many meetings you have versus how much time you spend actually working on stuff. That part is hard. Like especially with return to office and hybrid, we have like days where no one's allowed to schedule any meetings, which is nice because that's when people get their work done. But then other times where that means that there's days where you're full of meetings and you're just constantly telling people what you want to work on, but you don't have time to work on it. Yeah.
I
Yeah, I'm
don't think it
not
is a
sure if you
topic
have
we
the
can
same
cover
experience.
today. I don't have a
Yeah.
sense right now because I think in different stage of their career, people will have different opinions. And for an individual contributor, which is what I am right now, I think you're also a individual contributor.
Mhm.
I don't think meeting is a big part of our work yet. The meeting is just a means to an end. It's to get work done. You need to talk with the engineer in the other team to make sure you're aligned,
Yeah.
and but that's not the end goal. But for managers, I think the meeting ratio is a lot higher. They just need to have one-on-ones. They just need to have weekly like sync up with various other teams. It becomes I'd like to believe that the meeting's not the end, but the way that they're structured so
Yeah.
regularly and so frequently, and the number of them makes it feel like it is the end. Like they are just coming from meeting A to meeting B, and meeting C is back to back.
Yeah.
And earlier I shared that yesterday was a full day of meeting for me because I intentionally scheduled that because that's my in-person in-office day. I want to be able to meet in person. And then for my work from home days, I usually work from home 3 to 4 days a week. And for those days, I schedule way fewer meetings and get focused work done. And I feel like for me, that's I don't have a ton of meetings. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's nice. I think for me, it's like as like if you're like a lead on one of the projects, then you spend a little bit of time working on it, and then a lot of time aligning people and
Yep.
to know they're expected, and then some amount of time promoting it as if like
Yep.
this is something cool and everyone should get excited about it. Whereas like before you didn't have to do so much cheerleading, at least like in the PhD, like once
Yeah.
you pick your topic, everyone agrees that it's okay. And then you're like, you're aligned because it's just you working on it with your advisor.
Yep.
And so now it's like, I have to be aware what other teams are doing, and I have to constantly promote myself and my project,
Yeah.
which is how you get people to use what you're doing. But that sort of came for free before, and so these are some.
Not for free. Most of them just don't get it. Like professor don't advertise it, and then department don't advertise it, then your work just get unnoticed. It's just published,
Yeah,
but never get publicized in any
it
way.
depends how people react on the conference. If people really like it,
Right.
suddenly everyone wants to be involved, right?
Yeah, but that's still like not something you control. Like it's not. Yeah, it's not for free. And yeah, one thing that I think is helpful is that whenever I did something nowadays, I record a video and then I send it out to as many people, like relevant people, of course. I won't send it to random coworkers, and then just ask them for feedback. And if they want, we can hop on the meeting. And I find that's more thing. Otherwise, because previously I was doing the, hey, I built this cool thing, let's meet, let's grab a coffee and chat, and that's not really sustainable. First of all, like it's we're not physically located. That's not, coffee's not possible, and then schedule one-on-one out of the blue. It's also not something people appreciate. So I started to do, like, Slack has this nice built-in feature. You can record yourself, and then it's kind of time limit of 5 minutes. So it's really short, and then people watch it and they say yes, no, and this looks interesting, but I'm not really interested in this. Sure, like I'll reach out next time. But some people, hopefully a small proportion of those people, got really excited, and then that kick off a set of meetings that hopefully pan out to like a tech transfer or research collaboration or things like that.
Yeah, that's actually how we do it too. We have like our different levels of Slack channels. Like we have Spaces and like Google.
What, Google use Slack? I thought Google used
we
Chat?
use our Google Meet, Google Chat, Google everything, Google. Yeah. So we use that. We have these Spaces as part of like the Google Workspace, and then there'll be like small team ones, and then larger and larger. Like when I'm asking for help, and then there's some that are very friendly, just like to send around. Like anything that you found, like, oh, cool result, or here's a paper you might be interested in, or stuff like that. And so usually if you have like a good result, you'll create either like a small demo or just like a little highlight reel and then put it there. And then you'll get lots of like congrats from people. And then like 1 or 2 people will reach out on the side and be like, this is actually what I've been looking for, waiting for, like now let's talk. But I think you have like, this is a good point you make. You have to be good about doing that every time you have a good result, or whenever you want to promote yourself. That's like the right channel to do it. Otherwise, the chasing people around and trying to talk to them one-on-one, it becomes infeasible, especially at different offices. My team is spread out across like 3 or 4 offices, and so it's hard to do.
Yeah. I feel like today it's mostly been a therapy session for me. Thank you for walking me through the thought process. I already feel a lot better than before.
I hope your energy comes back. I think as soon as you introduce yourself to everyone, you can go back to working, and it'll be easy.
Yeah, and also the internal deadline has passed in the last week, so I think next week I'm gonna just be like not rushing to the deadline. There's no deadline anymore. The next one is coming out in a couple months, so I can take some time to just refactoring the code and not implementing some hacky workarounds.
Sounds good. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah. All right. And if you want to share your experience of work fatigue or other experience, leave a comment below, and we'll see you next episode. Bye.
Bye, guys.